Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching my review / early impressions of Last Epoch. I say early impressions because this is an ARPG. I've played about 50 hours for record, so a fair amount to be honest. But in ARPG standards, that's actually not that much really. But I feel like I have a grasp of everything that is in the game now, so I can give my first impressions and kind of review of how everything goes and how everything works. The first thing we're going to start off with actually is the big negative I have, which is just with the launch and the launch window. But I want to get this out of the way at the start, so the rest of it can be about the actual game rather than the kind of the launch surrounding the game. But the launch had significant server issues, and it is like they were unacceptable server issues essentially. They were working on it, which is fantastic. They worked really hard over the first week to try and get everything to be working well and everything working correctly. But honestly, the game for online mode was unplayable for 3 days, really. You couldn't really play it properly for about 3 days. And then it took them probably till 4 or 5 before it became what I would consider stable enough to be like a good launch. Which is just... It's not good enough, really, for a launch of a game like that. They were very confident before they launched that they would be able to handle it all, and they had some big problems in the back end. And obviously, you got to give them a bit of slack being a relatively small company. They only have like, I think 90 employees or something like that, which is not many. As I said, it is a big negative and a big mar on the game. Also, they have an offline mode, which helps. If you want to play, you can play the entire game offline and you don't have any problems with any of the server stuff, obviously, because you're not playing online. But you couldn't migrate a character from offline to online because they don't want people cheating in offline and then bringing that character online. Is their reasoning for that, which makes sense. But it's just... A lot of people, like when you're buying the product because it offers a particular set of things. One of those is online play where you can play with your friends, you have the auction house and you can trade stuff. All that kind of stuff, and it just wasn't available for like a whole week at the quote-unquote launch of the game. Which is, as I said, unacceptable. Having said that, they seem to have nailed out pretty much all of those issues at this point. So, we're going to pretend that it doesn't exist from now, and we're just going to talk about the game proper. So, first things first, let's cover character creation, because it's going to be what you're doing at the start of the game anyway. So I'll just cut to myself live in-game, rather than the background footage I've been showing currently. Alright, we are here. So, the classes that we have available. And these are going to highly affect your actual playstyle. It's not like PoE where you can mix and match everything. It is kind of a bit more similar to Diablo where your class determines your skills. And then you can modify that with gear on top, right? So we have the Sentinel. There are 5 base classes, each of which has 3 mastery classes. So if we have the Sentinel, this is the sword and board kind of warrior type deal, which transforms into either the Void Knight, which is kind of a dark magic-y void type build, where you create echoes of copies of yourself that will do your skills again. It's interesting. It uses a bunch of time magic and void magic. Interesting. Probably going to be the next character I create, actually. We then have the Forge Guard. It uses fire magic as well as kind of summoning magic. It can summon, like, I don't know if it's here. Manifest armor. There you go. You manifest a set of animated armor, which will go around attacking things. So it's kind of a summoner class, or a pseudo summoner class on the Sentinel. And finally we have the Paladin, which is what you would expect. It has healing, it has kind of lightning damage and holy auras and things like that. Your standard Paladin affair. Next up we have the Rogue, which has 3 archetypes, being the Blade Dancer, which is sword in each hand, running around, stabbing things with daggers and swords. Marksman, which is the bow build. Marksman is the only class in the game that can equip bows. So if you want to go around using bows, Marksman is the way that you have to go. And finally, we have the Falconer. Well, I guess technically the Falconer can too, I'm pretty sure. So these 2 are the 2 that can do bows. But the Falconer is a summoner class with a kind of twist in that the only summon you have is your Falcon. And it does everything for you, essentially. It's the one summon that's always with you. It'll attack enemies and stuff normally like the summon, but all of your abilities get comboed into the Falcon, and the Falcon does a lot of it for you. It's an interesting class. Next we have the Mage. Kind of standard affair, we have elemental magics. You can focus that into Sorcerer, which goes even heavier into those elemental magics. As you can see here, you get Meteor, Static Orb, Black Hole, that kind of thing. It goes into the real heavy hitting elemental damage. Next you have a Spellblade, which is a mage wielding a sword, essentially. There's a lot of melee hits here that they're not technically spells, they're technically melee hits, which is a bit different, so you scale them a bit differently, and they usually use swords rather than anything else. And then finally we have the Rune Master, which is, if anyone's played the game Magicka, that's essentially the class. You do spells. If you do a fire spell, you'll get a fire rune above your head. If you do a lightning spell, you get a lightning rune above your head. Ice spell, same deal. And the combinations that you make on those spells, you can then cast another spell with that combination. So you have the combinatorics of 3 different spells, and you can repeat, and then the order matters as well. So there is 40 different spells that you can cast with combinations. So it's a very interesting class. It's also another one that I really want to try. So I'm probably going to be leveling that after I level a Void Knight, because it seems very interesting. Complex, but now I understand the game better, I think I probably want to go into Rune Master. Next we have the Primalist, which goes into 3 archetypes. One, we have Beastmaster, which is just essentially the summon zoo build, so if you want to go into summoning pets, it's the way to go. These are kind of permanent companions, so they're just going to be with you the whole time, and then you have things to buff them. You have like this Frenzy Totem, for instance, which will do a buff to attack speed. I've played a bit around with the Primalist and the Beastmaster. Before the game launched, I played a couple of hours as the Beastmaster, and also I have a level 10 Primalist at the moment that I'm leveling up to be Beastmaster. So we're going to get there eventually. Next we have the Shaman, which is elemental magics. It focuses a lot on putting down a bunch of different totems and doing a bunch of spells like Tornado and Earthquake and things like that. And then finally we have the Druid, which is the shapeshifting class. You have 3 different forms you can shapeshift into. You have the Werebear form, which does a bunch of lightning damage and melee damage. You then have the Spriggan form, which is like your magic summon. It's kind of the physical. You got Werebear, the magic, you got Spriggan, and then you've got Swarmblade, which you turn into a insect type thing that does a lot of crit damage, I think, is where it kind of scales best. It seems to be a physical attacker like the bear, but the bear is kind of a hybrid. It does some like lightning attacks as well, I think. I don't know, I haven't done any Druid yet, so I'm not entirely sure how these work, but that's the general gist that I get with them. And finally, we have the Acolyte. This is the one I have by far the most experience with, because I played as a Warlock. But for the Acolyte, we have Necromancer. So Necromancer is exactly what you would expect. You summon a bunch of different skeletons, or one really big skeleton, and you have a big minion build, so you just have a bunch of minions. Next we have the Lich, which is also focused around transforming into the Reaper form, so you literally turn into a Grim Reaper, and then you have a bunch of buffs on top of that. And then finally we have the Warlock, which is like the kind of spellcaster archetype for the Acolyte. It is the sling spells everywhere, it does a bunch of fire and necrotic damage. My current build is a damage over time build based off Chthonic Fissures, which is you open a big line in the ground and let out a bunch of spirits that curse everything around you. It's kind of what the Acolyte is really good at. It can spread curses really, really well, which are damage over time effects, mainly. There's also some debuffs and buffs in there as well, but for the most part, they're damage over time effects. Excuse me. And the Warlock masters that by far the best. I think, generally speaking, I hit a pack of mobs and I put like 40 curses on them, or 40 stacks of curses on them. So yeah, that's all of the classes gone over. Next, I think I'm going to touch on the story of Last Epoch, which I actually quite liked. The campaign itself was fun. It's a pretty standard ARPG affair, which is to say the story doesn't really take the forefront. Really. The game itself is very gameplay based, and the story is there to facilitate the campaign and leveling your character to get to the end game. And for that, it is very, very good. I quite liked the story. I will say the voice acting was a bit all over the place. Sometimes it was top tier, and other times it just sounded like they're like, we need to voice this character, get a dev in here and record some lines. So some of them, very, very good. Some of them were a bit more patchy and didn't really sound as polished. But overall, the fact that it is voice acted with such a small team is quite impressive. And a lot of the voice acting roles were, as I said, perfectly fine, really good. It's just that some of them fell a bit flat by comparison. If they were all kind of that flat level, you'd be like, yeah, alright, it's a small development team, whatever, kind of crappy-ish voice acting. But some of them are fine. Like, some of them are really good voice acting, and then the others seem really crap by comparison, you know? You get that weird kind of juxtaposition. However, I will say about the campaign, you do have to do the campaign on every new character you create. However, it's possibly my favorite way that they've done it. So generally speaking in ARPGs, you often have to repeat the campaign on every character you create. The idea being that the campaign is a way to level your character, and then you hit the end game and you start doing end game stuff. Diablo 4 completely eliminated that, allowing every subsequent character after you've played the campaign once ever, you can just skip the campaign and go straight to endgame. You then have, on the opposite side of that, you have things like Path of Exile, in which you have to do the full campaign on every character, and all it becomes is optimizing the campaign as much as possible. Last Epoch, like in many ways, is right in the middle between Diablo 4 and Path of Exile. In Last Epoch, you have to do the campaign on every character. However, there are a bunch of points throughout the campaign that you can skip. You can just skip large swaths of the campaign. And it works very, very easily narratively because the entirety of campaign of Last Epoch has to do with time travel. So when you're doing time travel in a story, it makes it very easy to be able to have skips in said story because, you know, you can travel through time. So if you want to just skip a part, you just go through a part and you skip to the next part and then keep going. So, how do you skip the campaign? There's a couple of ways to do it. Firstly, the Monoliths of Fate. If we go back to my game here, you see the Monoliths of Fate here. We are at, this is the end game. You reach the end of time. As you can see here, the game is separated into kind of different eras. You have the Ancient Era, the Divine Era, which is where the gods are ruling over the world. You have the Imperial Era, where you have essentially an undead empire that rules the entire world, which is, you can see here, the ages. The Ancient Era is like negative 6,000. You get the Divine Era, negative 12. The Imperial Era is 1,000 years later. And then you have the Ruined Era, which is where the Void kind of has overtaken the whole place, which is about 200, 300 years after the Imperial Era. And then you have the End of Time, where the entire world is fragmented and pulled apart into different timelines that are barely held together, which is where the endgame comes in. But this endgame system, where you go into the Monoliths of Fate, you can actually enter this part as early as like level 15, I want to say, because you get to the end of time in the story relatively early. It's where you get your subclass. You're going through the story, you'll come to the end of time and you'll get your subclass through here. But when you're here, you can just walk over to the Monoliths of Fate. The downside, obviously, is the fact that the Monoliths of Fate start at level 58. However, if you do level up a character a bit, you can get to like level... You could probably do the Monoliths at level 40. You'll die a few times, but it's doable. And if you're really good at the game and you have a real min-max build, level 30, 32, 33, you could probably start doing the Monoliths of Fate and just start doing them, so you can just do the endgame. The only thing that you will need is passive points down here on the bottom left. We have passive point rewards, 15 out of 15, and idle slot rewards, 8 out of 8. I'll go into the idols in a second. But essentially these come from side quests in the game. So you will have to go back into the campaign, into these different eras, and go through and actually do the side quests required to get the points that you need. However, I was talking about shortcuts before. Here is a good example of a shortcut. As you're going through the campaign, you'll come through this section, you'll get to here, and you'll see here, alternative leveling path. This route will bypass many areas, but requires access and completion of the Soulfire Bastion. Completing Soulfire Bastion will take you to the Column Pass, level 47 in the Divine Era. So, the Soulfire Bastion here is one of the dungeons. There are 3 dungeons, all 3 of which are shortcuts through the campaign. They also have some endgame mechanics tied to them, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but safe to say, you can go through the dungeon, complete the dungeon, and that can just shortcut you through the campaign. So even if you don't have the skill or ability to go directly into the monoliths, you can still skip huge swaths of the campaign going through. So I think this is a fantastic middle ground where you have one side where you're sitting here and you've got Diablo 4 where you never have to do the campaign again, makes the game feel like it's lacking content, and then you have Path of Exile on the other end where you have to do the campaign every time you make a new character and it gets tedious. And this is a perfect middle ground where the first time I played it, I went through, I listened to all the story, I did all the side quests. Now on my subsequent characters, I can just carry them straight through. I can give them gimp gear from my first character, and I can just carry them through and do the shortcutted ways through the campaign to get to where I need, get the gear I want, get my ability points, all that kind of stuff, and then just start doing the endgame, which is what I want to do. So I love the way that they've done this system. It's really, really nice. I talked about idols. We can go into the equipment a bit. So looking at the equipment, we have our equipment screen here, we have our idols here. So the idols are kind of like what we had in Diablo 2, where you get kind of buffs by having things in your inventory, except they have their own inventory here, so you don't have to worry about carrying them around with you. But they are just stat buffs. So they come in different shapes, you kind of Tetris them into the available spots that you have, and they give you buffs. A lot of them are used to fill out resistances, I have found thus far. There are a lot of resistances in this game. The cap is 75, you probably want to be about 75 on all of them. overcapped on some for specific builds. And just generally because some enemies will penetrate your resistance, so you want to be overcapped just to counteract that. But these are also very good for getting you damage affixes, such as chance to poison on hit, chance to ignite on hit, fire damage, all that kind of thing. So they are essentially just stat sticks that you can add extra stats onto your character, apart from gear. Next up, we can talk about gear. Alright, so time to talk about gear. There are 4 main rarities of gear. There is also a few more on top of that, but we'll go into those in a second. The 4 main rarities are normal, magic, rare, and exalted. So the difference between each of these is essentially the number of affixes. So you can have up to 4 affixes on an item, and the number of affixes on there will determine what level the item is. Each affix can also be from rank 1 to 7. Obviously, the higher the rank is, the more numbers are on the item. So if you have right here, you can see this chance to ignite on this sickle here is rank tier 1. If it was tier 7, it would be giving me a way higher chance to ignite on hit. Probably over 100%, probably close to 200% chance to ignite on hit. A white item, i.e. a normal item, has no affixes, so it's just the base item. A blue item has up to 2 affixes on it. So as you can see, this one has 1 affix, puts it from a white to a blue. It has a 19% chance to ignite on hit. We then go to yellow, which has at least 3 up to 4 affixes on it. And then when we hit purple, or exalted, is when one of those affixes is greater than tier 5. So you can see here, this health on kill is tier 6. So tier 6 and 7 can only come from drops. So out in the world and actually finding a drop on the ground, you can only get that when you have a tier that is above 5. You can craft all of the tiers up to 5, no problem, but to get to a tier 6 and tier 7, you need to drop the item first, which is a really good system because what it means is that both the looting and collecting is just as important as going out and getting the crafting. So crafting isn't the best in the game. It needs to be combined with going out and actually finding the item. So you need to find a really good base item and craft on top of it to make your god items. And ideally, you can just find something out in the world that is fantastic, but the chances are very low. You're likely going to have to craft it up to being something good. But what it means is the best things you're going to find are going to be things where you find them in the wild and then craft them to make them perfect. Okay, so they're all the base items. Next, we have a couple of weird ones. So we have experimental gear. This comes from exiled mages. So these are going to pop up when you're going through the campaign and in maps later on when you're doing the monoliths. Essentially all these are is an enemy, a boss type enemy that is stuck in a little container. You'll see the container when you're running around the map. If you click it and open it up, the mage will come out and attack you. He will then drop an item once you kill him, which is an experimental something. The only thing you can roll are gloves, boots, or belts currently, so they're like the extremity armor pieces. But they have at least one of their affixes will be an experimental affix. An experimental affix is just a different pool of possible affixes that can go on those items that aren't there normally. So you can see it's highlighted in blue here, so you can tell what it is. But the 2.3 seconds of haste after you use a transversal skill and 31% increased effect of haste on you, that is what we call an experimental affix, and it can only come from an item that is dropped by an exiled mage. So they're kind of a side grade. They were added in a patch relatively close to launch, I think. It was one of the couple of patches before the main launch is when they added those. But they are an additional item. They're not really an item rarity because you can get them in blue, yellow, or purple. So you can get a tier 6 experimental affix. That is possible. Alright, and finally, we have the last two. So we have uniques, and then we have legendaries. We'll go over uniques first. Uniques are pretty much what one would expect. A unique is, like in other games, it changes your playstyle or changes some kind of significant way that you would play the build that you're not doing normally. So you can see this axe, for instance. When you hit a bleeding enemy with a melee attack, all bleed stacks on that enemy double in speed, so you're doing damage quicker. It also increases your bleed duration, chance to bleed inherently on the weapon, so it's a very build-defining weapon, right? You can build a build around doing a lot of bleed, and this would help you doing that. Now, this is a relatively low-level unique, but the higher level you get things like this here, is my Spine of Malatros. which gives +1 to all my fire skills, +3 to the damage over time skills, +3 to all my acolyte skills, which is all my skills. It makes my chthonic fissures do flame whips instead of releasing spirits. It does a lot of stuff, right? And this is a level 61 unique, as opposed to this one that's like level 13. So it does more unique things because it is a more powerful item. However, a unique will, generally speaking, give you things that you can't get on a regular item. Now, you can see here that this one has legendary potential. What this means is I can use this weapon as well as an exalted weapon that has 4 affixes on it. Most notably, I need to actually max out these affixes. Chance to bleed, sure. That will actually go relatively well in this weapon. So I can take this weapon. It has 1 legendary potential. So I can go to a dungeon. There is a specific dungeon in the game that you can do this with. And I could take this weapon and slam it with a weapon of the same type. So it's a one-handed axe. I could slam it with a one-handed axe. And one of these stats on this weapon will get put into this weapon to make a legendary taste of blood. So as you can see here, chance to bleed, that would be good. Health on kill, that would be good. Probably ideal because that is my tier 6. That is the one that is actually like the highest possible. So we have a 1 in 4 chance of getting this affix slammed onto this item to make it a better item. It doesn't change any of the base stats on this item. It keeps it exactly the same. It'll be a level 13 taste of blood. It will just have extra stuff on it. So the legendary potential. There is 1 legendary potential on this. It can drop up to 4 legendary potential. So you can have things with 4 legendary potential. And when you slam the exalted weapon into it, you'll get all 4 of the stats slammed directly into the weapon and make a very, very good weapon. You can see here we have my ambitions of Erased Acolyte. This gives me +1 to Acolyte skill, 7 endurance, and when nearby enemy or ally dies, I gain ward equal to 2 to 4% of its maximum health. So I get a bunch of ward, essentially, when I kill enemies. Now, this has a bunch of things slammed onto it. We have cold resistance, physical resistance, increased physical damage, and increased minion damage. This comes specifically from a different mechanic, but it is the same type of item. So this comes from Weaver's Will. So Weaver's Will, we can just read it here. As you slay enemies with this item, the Weaver will gradually rebuild it by granting it new random affixes and upgrading them. Each new affix tier costs 1 Weaver's Will. No more than 4 affixes can be added. So this will just make an exalted legendary item as you play with it. So that's what Weaver's Will does. It's another way of getting exalted items aside from the dungeon, or getting legendary items rather, aside from the dungeon. That's where this came from. I actually got this relatively early on, and it was very good for my build, so I'm kind of glad I got it. But it gave me minion damage, which I don't care about. Physical damage, I don't care about. The cold resistance and physical resistance is nice, but the other 2 are kind of pointless for me. So eventually I will want to upgrade this. But that's pretty much all for the gear. A lot of it is really good to use, and as I said, with I probably showed it in the middle there without really elaborating on it. But the crafting in this game is also very good. As you can see here, you have the 4 slots for affixes, you have the suffixes on the right, you have the prefixes on the left. This has a free prefix slot. So I can just go in here, and as long as I have shards for it, so these are just items you'll pick up in the game, you can also destroy the item and take the shards out. But these shards you'll get throughout playing the game, and if I have shards for it, I can just add on to the weapon. So this has critical transference, health on melee hit, chance to chill on hit, so let's say melee fire damage as well. Let's say I want melee fire damage, we can just add that affix. And since I have shards for it, I can also upgrade the affix. If I want more critical strike chance, I can just upgrade this all the way to tier 5. The one thing that you can't do is you only have as much forging potential as you can craft. So you can see here, a lot of low-level items will have a low amount of forging potential. It only has 14 forging potential. So I only have, let's say I want to add crit multiplier. This will cost between 1 and 14 forging potential to actually put onto my weapon, and I can do some things with glyphs here to modify that. So for instance, this Glyphs of Hope, it'll modify the outcome of the craft, granting it a 25% chance to take no forging potential. So there's also that goes into it as well. I'm not going to go fully deep into the crafting system, but it is very, very intuitive, and I picked it up pretty much immediately going through the campaign, and was using it the entire way through, and it's very easy to use and very good. And obviously the higher the item level is, the more forging potential you're going to get. So this weapon dropped like this, so it has all these 4 stats already, and then I have 41 forging potential, so I can upgrade a bunch of these stats however I wish. And finally, we have the combat itself, which is really I would say it's pretty standard affair for ARPGs, which is not a bad thing. Standard affair for ARPGs is very good. We have a lot of movement that goes around, you can get very, very fast in the game, and you tend to have all of your abilities synergizing very well through their level ups, which is another thing that I haven't gone through in the game, but if you look up your spells, you can specialize into up to 5 of them. I say spells, any abilities, and they have a full skill tree per ability. So you can see here we have my Spirit Plague. My base ability, curses a target with a powerful necrotic damage over time effect that lasts 3 seconds, spreads to a single nearby target on target death. We can then go through and spread this out and add a bunch of things to it. For instance, Discharge. Spirit Blade spreads after a duration. So after 3 seconds it'll spread even if the enemy doesn't die, so if I curse a boss, that means that they will spread it without them even dying. Down here, Spirit Plague has additional spell necrotic damage for each point of intelligence. Over here, Spirit Plague is now cast in an area around the target, but costs more mana. Enemies that are inflicted with Spirit Plague are also inflicted by regular Plague for the same duration. Plague is an ailment that deals poison damage over time, spreading between enemies. You can go down here, it does more poison damage, it does poison penetration. You gain increased poison damage when you afflict something with Spirit Plague, so you're doing even more damage. So every single ability in the game can be specialized like this. So you can go in and you can specialize all of these abilities and add, as my Chaos Bolts here, which is my kind of... I fire a big ball that does a bunch of AoE damage. If we look at this here, ordinarily you fire 3 of these. I have specialized this all the way down so that I fire 1 big one rather than 3 small ones, and it does more damage and is in a bigger area. But you do all these things and you can really change how these work. As you can see, there's a node over here that turns these Chaos Bolts from fire damage to cold damage instead. So if you want to do cold damage rather than doing fire damage, you can do that. And you can kind of specialize all your abilities in a really deep way with this system, and I really, really love it. But the combat itself feels quite weighty. I've probably had a bunch of footage of me just running through some kind of mid-game stuff in the background, and you can see how the combat kind of feels. You have big hordes of enemies running at you, and you do big chunks of damage to big hordes of enemies and wipe them all out. It's a very nice feeling game, which most ARPGs are, to be perfectly honest. But this one in particular feels nice. There's nothing that feels particularly like floaty or anything about it. The combat has a lot of kick and physicality to it, and I like that quite a lot. But just in general, it is very, very fun to play and speed through maps. All in all, I really like the game. First impressions, it's fantastic. If you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and I'll see you next time. But this game 100% has my recommendation. All of their server stuff seems to be pretty much fixed at this point, so now I can give with full confidence, buy this game, play it, it's great for $35, you're going to get more than enough out of that $35, and it's really worth the purchase. In any case, as I said, like, subscribe, all that kind of jazz, and I shall see you next time. Bye guys.